Welcome to another episode from HenRefurb, at last. I'm sorry for the delay once again, but life got a bit busy as me and my partner moved house. The only problem is we don't have room for all the stuff, like the Dodge. So the Dodge is staying in the workshop until it's done, basically. And my workshop at home now looks like, well, this. And as you can see, well, there's really not much room to move in here, so the Dodge project is going to stay at the farm until it's done. But for now, I'm going to take you all back in time slightly and have a look at this rear axle. Right, the first coat is on. They've sat for a couple of days drying now, so it's all rock hard. Just going to go over now and tidy there's a couple of little weird blemishes just dotted around, and there's a little bit of a run along this edge here. I obviously missed that. Overcooked it a bit on the paint gun. And then there's just a couple of bits of blemishes over there just to fiddle around with. I'm just going to wet sand those, and then I'll probably wet sand over the whole thing just to scuff it, and then I'll put another coat on. So here's all the bolts that I'm going to need to put the entire axle back together. I cleaned them all, stuck primer on them so they won't rust again, and I will put a top coat over them at some point. And over here, turn that noisy thing off, all of their nuts and washers basically for the same thing. The time has finally come to reassemble the rear axle. This is incredibly exciting. It's taken forever to get to this stage, and I've laid it all out and it looks incredible, so I'm going to have to show you. It's immensely satisfying. Look at all that. There's literally every single bit there. There's nothing missing. Every single piece required to build this rear axle is laid out right here in front of you. I'll just do a nice close-up pan for you so you can see all the glory that is that stuff in front of you. Doesn't it just look great? So looking forward to putting something nice and shiny back together. It will be delightful. But there are a lot of parts and it's going to be a bit of a mission, and there's a lot to do. So got my trusty dodgy old ancient reprint of the 30s workshop manual, so basically everything I need to go, and here we go. So obviously I've got to start somewhere, and I think basically there's a number of sub-assemblies. So for example, this unit here, this is the differential carrier, so there's the crown wheel, all of these fixings, these gears and stuff, all of that can go back together. So that clears all of that into one little unit. You've got the pinion unit, so there's this carrier over here, the pinion and its shaft bearings and spacer and all of that sort of stuff can all go into that ready. And then the pinion unit goes in the body, the carrier is then put in the back with its bearings and adjustment wheel and all that sort of stuff, and then it's a case of actually doing the adjustment, so the crown wheel meshes with the pinion perfectly. That's going to be an interesting step. There'll be a lot of fine adjusting going on there to get it actually right, but I'm going to start by assembling this assembly here. Okay, that's the first assembly complete. See the differential inside. All lovely and clean and smooth now, it's good. And the crown wheel is on its carrier. So moving on to the next one. Right, so I've got as far as building the whole differential now. So if I turn this flange up here, you see it turns the crown wheel and the differential carrier. But these big adjustment wheels here, which set the position of this, where it meshes with the pinion, which is down in that gap, this can be moved left and right, And those adjustment wheels do that, but they also set the preload of the bearings that are inside these caps. So I've got to get the preload right and then set the adjustment. I need to go and do some reading about some specs, see if I can find some information on how to get that right first time, and then I'll carry on. Right, so now I've got the bearings nice and tight, the preload's approximately right. They're set in the right position that essentially they'll be in as pairs. So now, from now on, if I adjust it, I adjust them both together so that they don't change the tension on the bearings. What I'm going to do now is just snug the bearing caps like so, and then I'm going to paint mark the teeth on the crown wheel, both the drive side and the reverse side, and we're going to run the crown wheel round past the pinion, and the pinion should cut the paint off these teeth at the point they contact. So when I next see the paint come back round, I should see where the pinion has touched this gear, and using the marks left behind by that, I should be able to work out whether or not this gear and that gear are in the right position. So we'll stick some paint on and then see where we go. Well, the paint's not playing ball, probably because it's too cold out here, so I'll try it with some Engineer's Blue instead, see if that's any good. Okay, so now the theory is I just push this round until it meshes with the pinion. And back and forwards and back and forwards and back and forwards and back. And then that's not half bad. So you can just about see, that one's quite clear, there's a stripe right down the middle of the side of the tooth, which is good. And then on the underside, hopefully we can see up there as well, there's a stripe roughly in the middle, but it tails off a bit, so I've just got to double check that that's okay. I've got a little look-up chart just to see if I can get it any closer than that, because it looks like the stripe on the top side is too far this way, too far over this way, because I can see the end of the stripe in there, but it's running off the gear, so I'm pretty certain I should be able to move it in just a touch, and then we'll try again. I need to move this crown wheel that way, so it's going to mesh closer to the pinion now, basically. So I've just got to free these off. First things first is I've got to back this one out. I'm going to back it out one notch, which is about there, I think. Make sure that still lines up. There we go. And then I've got to wind this one in one notch, which is going to be something there, I think. Yep. Snug these back up again. Okay. So exactly the same thing again. Just going to wind this past the pinion, back, forth, back a couple of times just to get a good reading. Right, I think I've got it as good as it's going to get. So if you look in there, it's not the easiest thing to see, but the teeth, you can see the in and the out all on the tooth. There's nothing overhanging, or the mark itself doesn't run off the edge of the tooth anymore. You can see where it starts and ends on the tooth. It's hard to see with my torch, but that one there along that tooth is quite a good example to look at. You can see the start and the end of the mark, and then on the reverse sides the marks are actually clearer on the reverse sides, but again you can see the start and the end within the tooth, which is what you're aiming for. They're they're roughly in the middle of the tooth, positioned left to right, and they start and end within the length of the tooth, which is just perfect. So that should be absolutely silent, and so it's next to no backlash in that either now. So there's enough. You can hear it, but makes for a dead silent operation. And if you listen, I'll be as quiet as I can, but there's no noise down there. It's a really, really smooth roll past on the pinion, which is really good. That's what we're after. So hopefully that'll do. I've just got to tighten these up properly and then make sure that it's still happy, and if so, we're good to continue. Okay, so happy with this. Everything went fine. These are all tight and lovely. You may have noticed me putting these little brackets on, and this bolt there and bracket there as well. And then I've put what's called a lock wire through. So you can see there's a piece of wire that goes through the bolt head and then tucks under the piece of metal back out, and it's all twisted together there. What that does is it prevents that ever coming loose, and that holds this on, which prevents this ever moving. Because if this turns, the adjustment goes out, the bearings ruin themselves, the gears, pinion and crown wheel will ruin themselves as well, and you could have a catastrophic failure where your differential explodes into a million pieces. So it's quite important that all of that's done right. And the wires are locked specifically so that the nut cannot undo. It cannot turn anti-clockwise because of the way it's wired. So if I wired it the other way around, then it would be able to undo but not do up. Whereas this way around obviously doesn't ever undo itself, which is great. So next thing is just to give the insides of that a quick wash out, and I should be able to fit this to the axle tube, which will be fun. Well, that's starting to get pretty heavy now. So the differential is in the axle tube now, as you can see. That's looking a lot nicer than it looked last time it was all together in that state. Next thing to do now, I think, is to get the oil seals and, well, play around with the axles and see if I can get those to go in. I did it! It's all done, finished. Looks a little bit better than it did when I took it off. So this is just loosely plopped together for now because I've got to finish restoring the brake system to be able to put the brake plates on each end, and same at that end. So yeah, when I get the brakes done, I'll get this hooked up to the chassis and then fit the brakes up, and then I think we'll be at a stage where we can get the chassis fully back on wheels again, which will be really exciting. So that brings us to the end of this episode, I'm afraid. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Next up, I think we're going to start looking at actually getting that chassis back on wheels, because I've got nearly everything I now need to put the chassis on 4 wheels, which is really cool. So if you've got any questions or suggestions, pop them in the comments section below. Otherwise, see you next time.